Living in my dream home turned into a nightmare when the HOA started harassing me about my brick driveway, a tribute to my late grandfather's craftsmanship. But what these power-hungry board members didn't know was that their entire construction division was about to get a wake-up call from their own CEO, my father. How will they react when they realize they've been trying to evict their boss's son? Welcome to my channel. Please subscribe if you want more Karen and HOA stories. I never thought my peaceful life would be turned upside down by a brick driveway, of all things. It started 3 months ago when I moved into my grandfather's old house in Pine Grove Estates. The house needed work, but the one thing that always made me smile was that beautiful hand-laid brick driveway my grandfather had built himself back in 1975. The trouble began when Karen Mitchell, my next-door neighbor and HOA board member, started taking pictures of my house. At first, I tried to be friendly, waving from my porch as she walked by with her designer handbag and perpetual scowl. But then the letters started coming. "Your driveway doesn't conform to HOA standards," the first notice read. "All driveways must be concrete or asphalt." I couldn't believe it. This driveway had been here for nearly 50 years, long before the HOA even existed. I tried reasoning with Karen during one of her inspection walks. "This driveway is historical," I explained calmly. "My grandfather built it himself. It's part of the house's character." She just sneered. "Rules are rules. The HOA board has unanimously voted. You have 30 days to replace it with approved materials, or we'll begin eviction proceedings." My blood boiled, but I kept my cool. "I'd like to see the original HOA documents," I requested. Karen's smirk grew wider. "They're only available to board members," she said, turning on her heel. "But trust me, we have every right to enforce this." That night, I couldn't sleep. The thought of destroying my grandfather's handiwork made me sick. As I sat at my kitchen table, looking through old family photos, I found one of my grandfather and father working on the driveway together. Dad was just a teenager then, learning the trade that would eventually lead him to become CEO of Mitchell Construction, the very company that built most of Pine Grove Estates. I hadn't told anyone about my father's position when I moved in. He'd taught me to make my own way in life, and I wanted to fit in based on my own merits. But as I stared at that photo, a plan began forming in my mind. The next morning, I started documenting everything. I took videos of Karen measuring my grass with a ruler and photographing my mailbox. I recorded her yelling at other neighbors about their garden gnomes and wind chimes. But what really caught my attention was how she seemed to be targeting only certain homes while completely ignoring violations at others. While checking my mail, I overheard her bragging to another board member about how they could force undesirable residents out by selectively enforcing rules. My hands shook as I pretended to sort through envelopes, recording every word on my phone. Just as I was about to head inside, a moving truck pulled up to the Johnson's house across the street. Mrs. Johnson, a sweet elderly widow, was in tears as she supervised the movers. When I asked what happened, she broke down completely. "The HOA fined me into bankruptcy," she sobbed, "all because my son painted my shutters the wrong shade of brown while visiting last month. Karen said it was chocolate brown, when the rules specifically state mocha brown is the only acceptable shade." That was the last straw. I went inside and called my father's office, something I'd never done before. His secretary put me through immediately. "Dad," I said, my voice shaking with anger, "I need to tell you what's happening in Pine Grove Estates, and you're not going to believe who's behind it all." Before I could continue, my doorbell rang. Through the window, I could see Karen, standing there with 2 police officers and what looked like an emergency eviction notice in her hand. "We'll handle this the hard way then," I heard her say loudly. "Officers, this resident has repeatedly refused to comply with HOA regulations. We have the right to remove him immediately." I looked down at my phone, still connected to my father's line, and smiled. The HOA board had no idea what was coming. The next morning, I woke up to find my entire front yard plastered with violation notices. Karen had gone door to door telling neighbors I was lowering property values. My phone was flooded with texts from concerned neighbors, some supporting me, others pressuring me to just give in. While gathering my mail, I spotted Karen photographing my driveway from different angles. "You know," she smirked, "my husband's concrete company could give you a special discount." That's when it clicked. This wasn't about rules, it was about profit. I spent the evening digging through old HOA records at my kitchen table. Turns out, Karen's husband's company had mysteriously won every driveway contract in the neighborhood for the past year. Even more interesting, they were charging double the market rate. Just as I was connecting the dots, a certified letter arrived. The HOA was threatening legal action and daily fines of $500. They'd even scheduled an emergency board meeting to vote on my eviction. My hands shook as I read the notice. I had 72 hours to comply or face eviction proceedings. I reached for my phone to call my father, who I hadn't spoken to in months due to a silly argument about my career choices. He was a big-shot CEO at a construction company, and I'd chosen to become a teacher instead of joining his business. But before I could dial, another notice slipped under my door. Final warning: driveway removal required, within 24 hours. Looking out my window, I saw Karen leading a group of board members on a property inspection tour, pointing at my house and gesturing wildly. What they didn't realize was that I'd just discovered something in those old records that would turn their whole world upside down, and it had nothing to do with my father's position. But should I use this information now, or wait for the perfect moment to expose their scheme? I couldn't believe my eyes when I opened my front door that morning. Karen, our HOA board president, was standing there with 2 police officers and a stack of papers. My heart raced as I remembered the heated argument from last week about my brick driveway. "Sir, these officers are here to witness the delivery of your final eviction notice," Karen announced with a smug smile. "You have 48 hours to remove those unauthorized bricks or vacate the property." I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm like my father taught me. "Officers, I'd like to show you something," I said, pulling out my phone. I played the security footage from 3 nights ago, showing Karen and her husband sneaking onto my property at 2 a.m., attempting to pry up my bricks with crowbars. The officers' expressions changed immediately. Karen's face turned pale. That's not what it looks like," she stammered. "Really? Because it looks like criminal trespassing and attempted property damage," I replied, "and I have more." I showed them photos of Karen's own driveway, modified without HOA approval last year, and documentation proving my brick installation was actually grandfathered in from before the HOA even existed. But Karen wasn't done. She pulled out her phone and started calling someone. "Hello, construction division? Yes, I need to speak with the CEO immediately about an urgent violation." My heart skipped a beat. She was trying to call my father. "The CEO is unavailable," the receptionist responded on speakerphone. "He's in an emergency meeting about recent HOA board misconduct." Karen's hand trembled as she ended the call. The officers exchanged glances, clearly realizing this situation was more complicated than a simple HOA dispute. Just then, my elderly neighbor Martha hobbled over. "Officers, I need to show you something too," she said, pulling out her own phone. "I've lived here for 40 years, and I've been documenting everything." She played a series of videos showing Karen harassing other neighbors, issuing fake violations, and even admitting to taking bribes to overlook certain infractions. The police officers took notes while Karen's face cycled through every shade of red. "This is all lies!" she shouted. "I demand you arrest him for non-compliance!" One of the officers turned to Karen. "Ma'am, based on the evidence we've seen, you might want to contact your lawyer instead." As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a text from my father. "Son, don't tell them who I am yet. The board meeting starts in 20 minutes. Keep recording everything." I looked up to see Karen furiously typing on her phone, probably messaging other board members. The officers asked me if I wanted to press charges for the trespassing and attempted vandalism. Before I could answer, a sleek black car pulled up. A man in an expensive suit stepped out. It was James Wilson, the HOA's lawyer. Karen's face lit up with relief. "This property dispute needs to be handled internally," James announced confidently. "Officers, you can go now." But then he saw me, and his confident smile vanished. He recognized me from the company Christmas party last year. I saw the exact moment he realized whose son he was about to evict. "Karen," James said slowly, "we need to talk. Right now." He grabbed her arm and started pulling her aside, whispering urgently. I watched as Karen's expression shifted from confusion to horror. She looked at me, then at her phone showing the time, 10:45 a.m. The board meeting would start in 15 minutes. What she didn't know was that my father had spent the last week gathering evidence from every resident she'd harassed. The construction company's internal investigation had uncovered years of kickbacks, falsified violations, and personal vendettas. As Karen and James huddled in panicked discussion, Martha winked at me and pointed to more neighbors emerging from their homes, phones in hand, ready to share their own stories of Karen's tyranny. The stage was set for the most dramatic HOA board meeting in history. But first I had to decide, should I press charges now, or wait to see what my father had planned? I stood in my kitchen, staring at the final eviction notice from the HOA, when my phone buzzed with a text from Sarah, my next-door neighbor. "Karen's outside taking pictures of your driveway again," she warned. I grabbed my coffee and walked to the window, watching as Karen, the HOA president, strutted across my brick driveway in her designer heels, snapping photos like a paparazzi. That's when I decided enough was enough. I'd spent 3 months dealing with their harassment over my grandfather's handcrafted brick driveway, which they claimed violated some obscure rule they'd made up last week. They had no idea they were messing with the wrong person. I pulled out the folder I'd been saving for the perfect moment. Inside was a stack of documents that would make Karen's perfectly styled hair stand on end. Property records, original development plans, and most importantly, a detailed report from my father's construction company, the very same company that built this entire neighborhood and still managed all HOA construction projects. My hands shook as I dialed my father's office number. I'd been avoiding involving him, wanting to handle this on my own, but watching Karen parade around my property like she owned it was the last straw. "Dad," I said when he picked up, "remember how you told me to call if the HOA situation got worse? Well, they just served me an eviction notice." The silence on the other end was deafening. Then came his calm, collected voice, the one he used in board meetings. "Send me everything," he said, "and don't leave out a single detail about Karen's inspections." Just then, my security camera pinged. Karen was now measuring my driveway with a tape measure, her face twisted in satisfaction. But she froze when she saw me walking outside with my phone, recording her every move. "Excuse me," I called out, "but you're trespassing on private property." "I'm the HOA president," she snapped, waving her tape measure like a sword. "I have every right to be here. Your driveway is 3 inches wider than regulation, and these bricks aren't the approved color. You have 48 hours to tear it out." I smiled, knowing what was coming next. "Actually, Karen, I think you'll want to check your emails before making any more threats. The CEO of your construction division would like to have a word with the board. Emergency meeting, tonight." Her face paled as she checked her phone. There it was, an urgent email from the CEO himself, my father, calling for an immediate board meeting to discuss serious concerns about recent HOA enforcement actions. What Karen didn't know was that I had something even bigger planned for tomorrow's meeting. Something that would not only save my grandfather's driveway, but would change the way this HOA operated forever. As she stomped away in her designer heels, I could already picture the look on her face when she discovered that every single harassment incident had been documented, every illegal rule change recorded, and every piece of evidence was about to land on the desk of not just the CEO, but the local news station that had been very interested in my story about HOA abuse of power. I went back inside and picked up a framed photo of my grandfather, laying these very bricks 20 years ago. "Don't worry, Grandpa," I whispered. "They're not touching a single one of your bricks. In fact, after tomorrow, they might be begging to have driveways just like mine." The sun was setting as I finished, preparing my presentation for tomorrow's meeting, when suddenly my phone lit up with multiple notifications. It seemed Karen had been busy. She'd called an emergency pre-meeting of her most loyal board members. But what she didn't realize was that Sarah, my neighbor, was listening to every word through the thin walls of the community center, and what she just texted me would change everything. "They're planning to bulldoze your driveway tonight. Karen just hired a contractor. They're coming at midnight." I sat back in my chair, heart pounding. Should I call my father? The police? Or was it time to put my own plan into action? The one that would expose not just Karen's abuse of power, but her connection to the very contractor she'd been forcing everyone to use for years? As headlights appeared at the end of my street, I knew I had to make a decision fast. I couldn't believe my eyes when I opened my front door that morning. Karen, flanked by 2 police officers and a smirking HOA board member, was standing there with an eviction notice in her hand. My heart raced as I remembered my father's warning to keep his identity secret until the perfect moment. "We're here to enforce the eviction," Karen announced with a smug grin. "Your non-compliant driveway has decreased property values by 15%, according to our latest assessment." I calmly pulled out my phone and played the recording from last week's confrontation, where Karen had threatened to make life impossible for me unless I replaced my grandfather's handcrafted brick driveway with their approved concrete. The officers exchanged uncomfortable glances. "Officers, I'd like to report harassment and attempted extortion," I said, watching Karen's face turn pale. "I also have evidence that the HOA board has been selectively enforcing rules and accepting kickbacks from their preferred contractors." The HOA board member stepped forward, trying to salvage the situation. "These are baseless accusations. We have full authority to—" "Actually," I interrupted, pulling out a thick folder, "I have copies of every approved driveway modification in this neighborhood for the past 5 years, including 3 brick driveways approved just last month for board members' relatives." Karen's confidence cracked as I continued presenting evidence. "I also have proof that the construction company you've been forcing homeowners to use has been overcharging by 300% and splitting the profits with certain board members. The police officers were now fully focused on Karen and the board member, who started backing away. That's when my phone rang. It was Dad. I put it on speaker. Son, I'm 5 minutes away with the FBI's real estate fraud division. Keep them there. Karen's face went from red to ghost white as she recognized my father's voice. Wait, you're Richard Thompson's son? The Richard Thompson? Our CEO? I smiled as 3 black SUVs turned onto our street. Maybe you should have checked whose son you were trying to evict before starting this witch hunt. And Karen? That decrepit brick driveway you've been insulting? My grandfather built it with the same bricks he used to build this entire neighborhood's foundation 50 years ago. The FBI agents approached as Karen and the board member looked for an escape route. But the real shock came when my father stepped out of the lead vehicle, wearing not his usual business suit, but instead his original construction company jacket from 1975, with Thompson Construction and Development stitched across the back. The neighbors started coming out of their houses, phones recording everything. My father's voice boomed across the driveway. Board meeting in 1 hour. And Karen? Bring your resignation letter. We have a lot to discuss about those kickbacks. But just as we thought justice was about to be served, Karen pulled out one final, devastating piece of paper that made even my father pause. What could she possibly have that would make the CEO of Thompson Construction take a step back? The emergency HOA meeting that night was packed. My father took the podium, introducing himself as both Construct Right's CEO and my dad. He revealed how he'd been watching this unfold, documenting every illegal action the board had taken. Not only had they violated homeowner rights, but they'd also breached their contract with Construct Right by attempting unauthorized construction removal. Karen tried to interrupt, but Dad wasn't finished. He projected photos showing her own unapproved home modifications, a fact she'd conveniently hidden from everyone. The room erupted in chaos. Other homeowners started sharing their stories of Karen's selective enforcement and harassment. Susan presented her research showing 5 other properties, incorrectly mapped under HOA jurisdiction. The board members, realizing their liability, quickly distanced themselves from Karen's actions. Then came the final blow. Dad announced Construct Right was dissolving the current board due to contract violations, calling for new elections. Karen stormed out, but not before threatening to sue everyone. The next week, we held new board elections. Susan became president, implementing fair policies that actually helped our community. As for my brick driveway, it became a symbol of standing up to HOA overreach. Other neighbors even started requesting similar designs. Every time I pull into my driveway now, I think of my grandfather, knowing he'd be proud that his final project helped bring positive change to our community. The best part? Karen put her house up for sale last week. Turns out, living in a community where you can't bully people isn't her style. Dad and I shared a laugh about it over coffee this morning. On my very legal, very beautiful brick driveway, I thought everything was finally settled after the HOA board's public apology. But Karen wasn't done with her revenge plot. Last Tuesday, I came home to find bright orange violation, stickers plastered all over my brick driveway. According to her latest complaint, my unapproved landscaping modifications were supposedly decreasing property values. I couldn't help but laugh when I saw her peeking through her curtains, probably expecting me to have another meltdown. Instead, I calmly took pictures of the stickers and called my father. He was furious but told me to play along. He had a perfect plan to end this once and for all. The next morning, a full construction crew showed up at Karen's house. They started marking her property lines with bright flags and taking measurements. She stormed out in her designer bathrobe, demanding to know what was happening. The crew chief handed her a notice. A complete property survey had revealed that her prized rose garden and decorative fence were actually on HOA common ground. Karen's face turned redder than her roses when she realized who had ordered the survey. My father had pulled up in his CEO car just in time to witness her tantrum. He explained that as part of the HOA's new compliance initiative, all properties would be thoroughly reviewed, starting with board members' homes. The best part? Karen's violations would cost thousands to fix. But my father offered her a deal. She could keep her garden if she immediately resigned from the board and signed an agreement never to file another complaint against any neighbor. The look on her face when she realized she'd been outplayed was priceless. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood. Other residents who'd suffered under Karen's reign of terror started sharing their stories. Soon, a petition was circulating to completely overhaul the HOA's complaint system. My father used this momentum to implement new rules requiring board members to undergo training on property laws and conflict resolution. Today, 6 months later, our community has transformed. The new board focuses on actually improving the neighborhood instead of harassing residents. Karen still lives across the street, but she doesn't make eye contact anymore. And my brick driveway? It's become a symbol of standing up to bullies and fighting for what's right. Sometimes I catch new neighbors admiring it, and I tell them about my grandfather's craftsmanship and the battle it took to preserve his legacy. I thought the drama was finally over after exposing Karen's illegal swimming pool to the HOA board. But she wasn't done with me yet. While checking my mail this morning, I noticed strange white powder scattered all over my precious brick driveway, the last piece of craftsmanship I had from my grandfather. At first, I thought it was just salt from the recent snow, but then I saw Karen hurriedly closing her curtains. I took samples and called the police to document everything. While waiting, I remembered the security cameras I had installed after the first few HOA incidents. Reviewing the footage, my blood boiled. There was Karen at 5 a.m., spreading what looked like concrete etching acid all over my grandfather's hand-laid bricks. The police arrived and were examining the evidence when my phone buzzed. It was Dad, who I hadn't told about Karen's latest attack yet. "Son, you need to come to the office right now," he said in his serious CEO voice. "Karen just submitted a massive bid for her construction company to replace all the driveways in the neighborhood, including yours." My hands shook as I showed the officers the security footage. They were especially interested in the part where Karen was making a phone call while spreading the acid. I couldn't hear what she was saying in the video, but her gleeful expression told me everything. She thought she had finally won. What she didn't know was that Dad had been quietly gathering evidence of her company's previous code violations throughout the neighborhood. He discovered her company had been cutting corners on materials and pocketing the difference. Now, with the acid attack documented, we had everything we needed. I watched from my window as police cars pulled up to Karen's house. The look on her face when they showed her the footage was priceless. But the real shock came when my father walked up behind the officers, holding a thick folder of evidence about her company's fraudulent practices. Karen's face turned ghost white as Dad explained that not only was she under arrest for vandalism and property destruction, but her company was also being investigated for fraud. The entire neighborhood had gathered to watch as she was escorted to the police car, still screaming about my non-compliant driveway. The best part? At the emergency HOA meeting that evening, Dad announced that his company would be repairing my grandfather's brick driveway for free and offered discounted driveway repairs to any neighbors who had been overcharged by Karen's company. As I watched my former neighbors line up to apologize and share their own Karen stories, I couldn't help but smile. Sometimes justice comes in unexpected ways. My phone keeps buzzing with messages from a blocked number. I'm sure it's Karen calling from jail. Should I answer and hear what she has to say, or let her stew in the consequences of her actions?